Welcome to the Workology Podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrill, founder of Workology.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of Workology.
According to its 2018 Candidate Experience Report, iCIMS found that nearly 7 in 10 people use Google as part of their typical process to search for open jobs and research potential employers. More specifically, 83% of millennials use Google during their job search, and Gen-Xers, which account for 68%, are taking advantage of the popular search engine more readily than their boomer counterparts, which accounts for 53%. The biggest question for HR leaders is how this will impact the future of recruiting, and is Google for Jobs a can't live without recruiting strategy for your talent acquisition teams? Welcome to the Workology Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by my friends at Clear Company. Today I'm joined by Chris Sotero. He's the Vice President and Client Architect at TMP Worldwide. I wanted to talk with Chris to get an agency perspective on Google for Jobs. Chris, welcome to the Workology Podcast.
Glad to be here.
Let's start with some background. In your role as a client architect for the world's leading digital recruitment and advertising communications agency, what does a day in the life of Chris look like for you?
Well, that's a tough one to answer, because I'd say that no day is the same in the crazy world of recruitment marketing. And what's really interesting is at TMP, we get the opportunity to work with a lot of different clients, a lot of different industries, and they all have very unique challenges that we have to help them solve. But to really boil it down, I'd say the role that I play is leading a large team of cross-functional experts, anybody from media experts to creative experts to research experts, with taking what we would consider core business challenges from our clients and developing strategies and marketing programs that help produce results for them. And I'd say that one of the most fulfilling things I think about working in this industry and in the role that I'm playing now is that it's always changing. It's always evolving, and the types of challenges and solutions that we produce can be very fulfilling, especially when you can see that the impact come to fruition from the start all the way to the finish. So, a lot of different things that I get to touch, and there's just a lot of information that I've built over the years by doing that.
I call all of that job security, like the fact that everything's changing all the time. They're always going to need, recruiters are always going to need someone to be able to help guide them in the right direction and help give them the resources to be able to do their jobs effectively.
Oh, most definitely, for sure. And I think, in this world, there's just so many facets to it. There's, candidate experience, recruitment process, branding, all sorts of things that I think a lot of companies need help with. And there's a lot of work to be done out there. And, it's great to help push companies forward, because for a lot of times, I like to think of it as a marathon, especially for things like candidate experience, right? We're always looking to improve that. So for sure, job security would be a great way to describe it.
Always changing. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about Google Jobs, and the context behind this is there's an article from a couple months ago that published over on ERE about how Google Jobs is changing the game and driving all this candidate traffic to career sites. And so I wanted to talk to someone who, you deal with a lot of different clients and employers, like you said, of all different industries. So I wanted to talk with someone who sees this from a different point of view and hear from you how you are seeing Google Jobs and Google change and the recruiting game and the career site game.
Sure. And Before I answer that question, I'll probably start with why I think Google is even making the move in the first place. So utilizing paid search with Google is not a new thing, right? It's been happening for many years. But one of the things that I've observed over the years is, well, first of all, everybody starts their search with Google, right? I know that there's lots of metrics out there that show that a lot of, not even just job searches, a lot of things start with Google, right? But I think what started to happen with Google was the way that people searched was very different on Google than it would be on an Indeed, for example. So what you end up happening is a lot of job seekers were using very broad terms on Google. Like, let's take, for example, retail jobs. So they do a search for retail jobs, but they don't on Google, but they don't search retail sales associate on Google. And I think what that led to, especially for a lot of advertisers using Google, would be, first of all, limited scope of targeted keywords that you could purchase from a search perspective, but also inflated bid prices. So you're at a point now, before Google for Jobs, where you're having to pay over $2 for a click on the keyword retail jobs. And you're not only competing with employers, you're competing with job boards, job aggregators, and everyone else who's trying to get that retail job seeker. So I think what's driving Google here is they want to get to a point where job seekers start searching for a lot of those keywords that they're searching on job boards and places like Indeed. I think that's really the long game. So, when we look at how that's changing things, I would say, when we look at how we leverage job aggregators today, not a whole lot's going to change there, right? Job aggregators still exist. You're going to leverage them. And they're going to, I think, still play as strong of a role as they did before Google for Jobs. But what we're seeing is the landscape's getting increasingly competitive. And, what I've noticed is, big picture wise, right? You look at what your goal is with something like Google for Jobs or using a job aggregator. Well, one way to look at it is that's just one tactic among a holistic employment brand and recruitment marketing strategy. So while you have that landscape getting increasingly competitive there, one of the trends that I'm seeing is that the employers who are very savvy about employer brand and driving consideration from job seekers in different ways, those are the people that are gaining that competitive advantage because they reduce their dependency on using paid media, period, right? So the trend I'm seeing is more of a macro media trend where companies are trying to reduce their dependency on using paid media by building relationships with candidates in other meaningful ways.
I think it's interesting that you're talking about how search is changing and Google is trying to, I guess, shift the mindset, because I think you're right. When you go for a job board, it's really specific. If I'm looking for HR jobs, human resource director, my city, pretty easy. And then the search comes up. But when you look at Google search, and if I did the exact same thing, the search results before Google for Jobs and maybe after still have a little bit of a ways to go to be as effective.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's what they're trying to change with the way that the job seeker searches. And I think we're starting to see a bit of that change in how they're searching now and how Google for Jobs is starting to collect traffic.
Also, I think they might also be doing this so that they can sort of measure and monitor for the number of searches before maybe they dive into a different area, or maybe they make their own, I don't know, whatever product beyond Google for Jobs 2.0 in different recruiting areas.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think, that just looking big picture there too, companies like Google, companies like Facebook even, they're starting to dip their toes into the job space because I think they realize how big of a market it is. Especially with all the, investment pouring into the industry right now. So, of course, Google for Jobs is one of the steps they're taking. But yeah, for sure, there's definitely long-term view on their side. And, Google certainly does have the resources and the money to really make an impact. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all evolves. I'd say right now, they still have a ways to go before they really start having a major impact on job search.
You mentioned how that Google for Jobs, or maybe this shift to where you're sort of as an employer or recruiting team more in control of driving candidates from maybe a search engine directly to a career site. So it's kind of shifting and changing patterns. But how is this mindset or this new way of searching for jobs changing maybe for recruiting leaders, how they manage their career sites?
So what I would say, it's a very simple answer to that question. I think really the only thing that's changing right now is if you do want to take advantage of this new free channel, you need to make sure that your job descriptions follow the Google Jobs schema. And that's going to make sure that the data that Google ingests from your site has you properly indexed and you're going to be findable. But it really doesn't change much beyond that, because I think the savvier career site builders have kept Google in mind for quite some time and have done things with their sites to gain competitive advantages on Google searches. For example, the career site platform we use at TMP will take jobs and create thousands of indexable pages in real time simply for the need of search optimization, right? So, companies that have been savvier about search engine optimization have been doing this for years and have been evolving to Google's algorithms. If anything, right now, Google for Jobs is now a new sort of SEO channel per se that, I'd say that if you haven't already, you would want to look into making sure that your job descriptions, your job titles, and how all of that data is organized is compliant with how Google is ingesting that information.
Now, we'll link to the recommended sort of structure for best practices for job descriptions and job postings, but can you kind of give us a little bit of a preview of maybe you, in your mind, the most important couple things that employers should be doing to be in compliance or optimized for Google for Jobs?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to the data signals that you send Google. And they have a list of all those data signals, and just making sure it's structured properly. Google wants to know information like salary and other things like that they're going to need to incorporate into their search. And the more data signals that you can send Google, the better information they're going to have for you within their search experience.
Let's take a reset. This is Jessica Miller Merrill, and you're listening to the WORKOLOGY podcast sponsored by Clear Company. We are talking about Google for Jobs with Chris Sotero.
Podcast support provided by Clear Company, a complete talent management platform designed to help small and medium-sized companies hire, retain, and engage A players. Visit clearcompany.com to sign up for a free personalized demo.
Now, if I heard you right, you weren't saying that this is the end of job boards or job aggregators. Really, this is just another tool in the tool belt of recruiting that recruiting leaders and recruitment marketers need to be aware of and consider when they're building out their strategies.
For sure. It's definitely good to be aware of. And, I can give you a little bit of information that we have here at TMP on sort of the scale that's led me to, come to the POV I have with that impact. And, I think it's all about how you look at data. So to just give you some background, here at TMP, we manage hundreds of career sites for different employers. And one of the great things about doing that is we have network data. And that means we can roll up all the information across all of those career sites and look for some of the macro trends. And this is especially interesting with Google for Jobs. So I can tell you right now, if I wanted to come up with a clickbait headline, I could say that TMP has seen a 400% increase in volume year over year in Google for Jobs traffic. That sounds pretty interesting, doesn't it? Sounds pretty impactful. But if I then layered on to that data point that when we looked at our data from 2018 across millions of visitors across many Fortune companies, the data point of the starting point for that year over year increase was that 0.28% of the traffic from our overall career site network came from Google for Jobs. Now, in 2019, it has grown tremendously, but it only accounts for about 1.6% of the total network traffic. So right now we're seeing, around 1 out of 10 1 out of 100, 1 out of 100 job seekers visiting everything across the board from Google for Jobs right now. Now, you could say some of that's segmented because Google for Jobs doesn't only index employers, it's indexing other job boards. Some of it can be coming indirectly from other job boards. That's for sure. But I think it's important to look at Google for Jobs within the lens of Google overall. So I can tell you that around 20% of all of those traffic numbers are coming from Google overall. That means that only 7% of the Google traffic is coming from Google for Jobs right now. So that means companies that do have solid SEO programs are benefiting from that, but they're still seeing just a portion of their SEO efforts coming from Google for Jobs. Now, that number, that 20% can go up or down. I've worked with some companies who are really good, like AT&T, who has much higher numbers than that. But it's a good baseline to just at least give some grounded context around it, right? It's definitely a very interesting, time with a lot of this happen, and big names like Google mean, lots of big headlines. But I think you have to, be grounded in how you look at it. And we look at it as it is a new channel that has opened up that we can capitalize on. And of course, 1.6% out of millions and millions of visits isn't a small number, but I don't think that it's at the point now where it's going to start taking away from career sites other job boards and job aggregators at the rate that a lot of people say. And I did bring a couple extra numbers here too, just to, give you an idea. I know that everyone's like, is Google for Jobs going to be the Indeed killer, right? Well, we of course have data on Indeed too. And I think context that, can be lost sometimes when people are talking about Indeed's decline in traffic is they made a major update to their user experience in 2018. And it was to create this double-paned navigation where when job seekers on Indeed click on a job, in the past, they used to go directly to the employer's career site. Now, they stay on Indeed and they don't go to the employer's career site until they click the apply button. Now, that on its own has led to a big impact in Indeed traffic. Now, does it mean less eyeballs on employers' jobs? Probably not. It just means based on how Indeed is working right now, they are sending less people to career sites than they had before. So I think that's one of the pieces that some people may miss sometimes when they're looking at Indeed's decline, because we've seen that decline, but there, you have to think about the fact that employer competition is at one of its highest levels in recent years. So you're going to have more people bidding on Indeed, more jobs on Indeed. So when employers see some of these decline in Indeed numbers, I don't think that Google for Jobs trend up is enough to give it credit yet.
That's why we talk to the experts, right? Because I read this article, it sounds super flashy and shiny. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's happening with Google for Jobs? Is it the end? Is it the beginning? What does this mean? And then you come with some really great insights and data and says, hey, hold up here. It's not maybe what the article and some others in the industry are saying that it might be.
Yeah, and that's the truth. That's why folks like me are what we like to call the unsung heroes. We're behind the scenes. We're doing the work. We're not always out there getting the headlines.
One of the things I wanted to ask you with Google for Jobs, you mentioned salary history. And I think that that's a really interesting piece now that's on a lot of their postings is they have salary ranges. Are you seeing from the clients that you work with, are they seeing this change positively, or is it seen as a negative thing? Because I know salary is kind of a touchy subject sometimes.
Yeah, salary is a very touchy subject. I would say as far as effectiveness on Google for Jobs specifically, it does give Google additional data to work with, but we haven't found any trends that point to that being a major competitive advantage from rankings and things like that. I think generally we would say the more signals you can give Google, the better. But I think when companies look at things like salary, you have to think of it more from a strategic perspective, depending on where your salary is. I know there is this trend where people are going to find salaries anyway, people report them on Glassdoor. There was a viral story about an anonymous Google Doc floating out there with lots of people adding salaries. And I know it's a very touchy subject. So I think where salary becomes more of an important thing is if you know as an employer that it is a competitive advantage for you, that is one attribute of many that you can message to candidates about that will give you a competitive advantage. And if that is the case, including that information could give you a competitive advantage on Google for Jobs, could give you a competitive advantage elsewhere, not necessarily from the ranking standpoint, but more so from the candidate's consideration set, right? If that is an attractive salary, you may attract more candidates as a result of that.
I also think personally that it's just kind of nice to do because it kind of allows the candidate to opt out of applying for the job if they don't meet the salary range or maybe they're way over. I know in my past career, have spent a lot of time interviewing for jobs only to find out that my salary expectation was $15,000 over their range. And I see a lot of candidates worried that they're going to be spending hours in interviews only to find out that it isn't the salary that they thought it was going to be.
Most definitely. And I think that's where transparency, is one of those things that a lot of more savvy employers are starting to, grip onto and start to incorporate across the board. I think salary is a good one. We've also had instances with clients where, they may have attrition further down the process in recruitment. And I know that realistic job previews have been, one of the old school ways of sort of caring for that. But we've also taken steps further on things like job descriptions by building out almost like this microsite-like experience on job descriptions that sort of act as that big consideration building set for the candidate. So if you can imagine like going to TripAdvisor or a place like that, and you're looking at whatever that hotel is, you sort of have this nice microsite experience within that. You can look at all this different information. So we started incorporating that into a lot of our job descriptions and doing things too, like even putting a realistic job preview video at that, on the job description itself, so that while candidates are considering, they can sort of get all the information they need without just blindly applying, wasting their time, wasting the recruiter's time, and that doesn't do good for anyone.
I like this point that you're making because I feel like the fear could be if you're optimizing your website to attract all these people that are coming through search engine optimization or organic search, the fear is that they're going to all apply for your jobs and they're not qualified for the job. But the things that you're talking about, salary transparency, a realistic job preview video, having a nice job description that actually articulates what is entailed in the job is going to give candidates the option to apply or not apply based on the more information that you provide them.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, we've had some clients that have had what we call the too many candidate problem, right? But what's interesting is you have lots of candidates that you don't want, but then you might need to do some marketing to find the candidates that you do want. And I think holistic approaches are very important in these cases, right? We can't look at anything in a vacuum, right? You can't just say, I'm going to do Indeed and that's all I do, right? So what we did is we've done branding campaigns where this was in the university relations sector where we've geofenced universities, did all kinds of things to really identify who our target demographic is. And then we serve them a creative advertising campaign informed by research that drives them to a destination. What's interesting is when we did this for this client, their career site traffic went way up. But through this microsite job description experience that I told you about that was also informed by conversations and research, we actually saw their number of apply clicks go way down. And that was by design. And what was interesting is when we finished the campaign, we looked in their applicant tracking system and saw that the percentage of quality candidates they got shot up through the roof. And a lot of those visitors that we may have had to attract through other efforts, just naturally by doing a brand creative campaign, had to build a better consideration set when they were on that job description. I mean, we took it to the level of having not a pop-up, but like a intermediary step when they clicked apply that reminded them of certain aspects about this university relations program that might have been harming them before with the too many candidate problem. And the candidates really had to think about it before they applied. And, taking that sort of measured approach, we've definitely seen success, like real success with some of the clients we work with.
I like that versus making the apply process an hour and making it so painful that only people who are really stubborn or just have a lot of time on their hands will go through the process.
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, I think that's a big pain point, in the industry overall right now. And, candidate experience could probably fill a whole nother podcast with some good gems in there. But yeah, I definitely agree.
I wanted to ask you one more question, and not necessarily about Google for Jobs, but I'd love to hear experience on what you're seeing with the clients that you work with when it comes to artificial intelligence and machine learning for recruiting from the agency perspective. Are you seeing more recruiting teams starting to adopt AI and machine learning in recruiting? And if so, can you give us maybe an idea of what is the prioritization of those? Where are you seeing the most interest in?
Yeah, so that's a great question and a question I'd love to answer. And what I'd say is I tend to group companies into one of two buckets. There are the types of companies, or even just the type of individuals in, recruiting and HR. And the first one I would say is the people who like to be on the cutting edge and like to be innovative, but may also be a little bit stuck in the feature function trap. And I call them shiny bauble chasers. And whatever the latest thing is, whatever the latest buzzword is, they will go after it. They will try it. They will fail fast. They will go after that because it's the newest, latest thing. That's group one. Group two are the people who are a little bit more measured. Before they go out and they look at technology, they ask themselves, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? And then they look to solve that problem. So when it comes to AI, machine learning, broad terms, there's a lot of different companies with a lot of different offerings out there that say they do different things. But what I've the trend I've seen is a lot of the companies have jumped on the chatbot train, and they want to have a chatbot on their website. They want to have a chatbot to, converse with candidates and things like that. And the reality is in some cases, I would argue that a lot of the chatbots out there actually make the candidate experience worse. And what's interesting is, if you were a small company, you could probably hand over your recruiting operation to somebody like an Alio, Olivia, Maya, and have them run your whole recruiting process, have a bot do it, right? You're a small business, you can probably work through that. But the reality is for the enterprise, I don't think you're going to find any of these AI companies out there right now who are really doing the full end-to-end, platform integration, from everything that they have. They may have some companies that are using chatbots. They may have some companies that are using some form of automated screening. And I've seen a lot of that. And where I get more excited with a lot of that is more so on how you can start training, using machine learning to train data models. And it's not always the quote unquote sexiest thing out there, but we've run some pilots with some companies, with some, companies in the space out there that are using signals from the client's data and figuring out ways to predict hiring outcomes, right? So you have to be careful. You don't want to do what Amazon did with going too seriously at screening in and out, right? You can get into some legal troubles. You can have some innate human bias. But I think by putting people into buckets, let's say good, better, best, something like that, not disqualifying anybody, and letting the data models start to ingest all those signals from your ATS, other things, and start to get good at predicting hireability and things like that. I think that, some of these traditional assessments and things like that may start to disappear. and you can start leveraging things like that data to, help optimize who your recruiters talk to first and things like that to drive actual business outcomes, as opposed to sort of just, jumping and saying, you know what, we need to be innovative. Let's start using machine learning. Let's start using data. And, like that aspect of it is probably the most interesting to me is solving those problems. I think we have a ways to go with some of the technology so far. I mean, I think I really, even just anecdotally, most people I talk to don't really get much out of chatbot experiences. It's really a different way to fill out a form. And then I think, when you get into a lot of the back-end processes companies have, sometimes it's just difficult to integrate with some of these companies at the enterprise. So I think enterprise companies, especially bigger ones, should probably look really hard at what their problems are, what areas they need to solve it, and really look at it from the holistic funnel. And, when they are reviewing the companies out there, they need to really have those right KPIs in mind. And I encourage people to pilot. You should pilot it. You should test it. You should see if it works, definitely, before you hand your money over to anybody.
I feel like those people that are in group one, shiny objects, those are the people that wait in line and camp out at the Apple store for the phone the day to be the first one. But, you're saying it sounds like bucket number two, group number two, that's really where you're going to move the needle. You might have the coolest iPhone ever for, 15 minutes or whatever, but you want to be able to know how to use that technology that you have in your hand and really maximize the money and the investment that you've made.
Oh, yeah. And I would say group two, I would always prefer to work with than group one.
Cool. Well, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. We're going to include your LinkedIn in the transcript of the podcast, but where can people go to learn maybe more about TMP and the work that you guys are doing?
Yeah, I'd say go to tmp.com. You can check out our blog, meshworking.com. And honestly, a lot of us are on LinkedIn. I'd say don't hesitate to reach out. We're a group of recruitment, marketing, and employer brand strategists and consultants, and we love helping companies solve problems. And I'd be happy to continue the conversation with anybody that would like to reach out.
With Google for Jobs entering the recruitment, marketing, and advertising space, candidates can find new jobs directly by going to Google, using their artificial intelligence and machine learning engines, rather than being sifted through the middleman community of job boards and job aggregators. Or are they changing their habits? Chris isn't sold, and neither am I. I don't know about you. I'm interested, though, in seeing how Google's entry changes search habits using these search engines, but also job boards. How are we searching for these jobs? It's going to be interesting to see how the increase of traffic, although minimal, but it is happening in Google for Jobs, impacts the larger recruiting space. And I appreciate Chris taking the time to talk with us and give us that agency perspective. Thank you for joining the Workology podcast, sponsored by Clear Company. This podcast is for the disruptive workplace leader who's tired of the status quo. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill. Until next time, you can visit workology.com to listen to all our Workology podcast episodes.
Production services for the Workology podcast with Jessica Miller-Merrill provided by TotalPicture.com.